Well, a double check before we get started here. I have set on the recording, and so people will be able to access the archive of this later once I get the URL set up. So I just want to double check that Katie, you can hear me and you can speak?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. And Jolyn?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. And Melinda?
Yes.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, all of you who are participants, I would like to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon. It's focusing on environmental education materials, guidelines for excellence. This is the second in a series of 6 webinars that are focusing on the National Project for Excellence in Environmental Education. And this project is an initiative of the North American Association for Environmental Education. And we are getting a couple of little messages, so when folks start to speak, that Jolyn and Katie, that you're both a little bit faint. So make sure you speak up and into your microphone. The chat function is really quite helpful to the participants of being able to give us some feedback there. I would just like to have each of us introduce ourselves so that you can begin to hear our voices and know who we are. My name is Bora Simmons, and I'm with the National Project for Excellence in Environmental Education. And again, that is a project of the North American Association for Environmental Education.
And I am Katie Navin with the Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education, and we're a professional organization, an affiliate of the North American Association for Environmental Education. And we have about 850 members across the state who are engaged in some type or form of environmental education. We do a lot of professional development and training and supporting those educators.
And I'm Jolyn Clark with the Greenway Foundation, and the Greenway Foundation is a nonprofit that was established in 1974 to reclaim, restore, and revitalize the South Platte River in Denver. And one of our biggest program areas is our environmental education program called SPREE.
Excellent, thank you. I wanted to give the participants a quick tour of Adobe Connect. Most of you have probably figured out some of the pieces, but up across the top of your screen there is a black ribbon, and on that black ribbon there is a little icon of a person with their hand raised, and if you need some sort of help along the way, you want to raise your hand because you need to pass some message on to us. If you'd like us to speak louder or softer, give us some applause, whatever, you can use that icon up there to send a message to us. Probably the easiest way, though, to send a message along the way is to use the chat function. So what you can do with that is just type in the little bar that's down at the bottom of the chat and then hit return, and that message will go out to everyone, and that way you'll be able to comment on things as we move along, as well as to ask questions and do things like figure out whether or not you can hear us, or give us impact or feedback that way. Melinda is going to be trying to keep track of the chat for us, and so that we can keep the whole thing moving along as we go through this. But you know, there's the obvious. It's hard to talk and read chat at the same time and respond to it. So Melinda's going to try to be our eyes in that way. So moving on, we'd like, this is Katie's.
All right. So we just want to get to know a little bit about you, who are all the participants on this webinar today, and find out a little bit about your environmental education programs. So our first question for you is just to tell us a little bit about where your programs take place. Are they in urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas, or maybe something else altogether? Go ahead and answer that poll that should be showing up right on your screen. And it looks like so far we've got a pretty even spread of programs across different types of areas, about 25% in each of those different areas. We'll give a few more seconds for people to answer that poll. Awesome. Pretty equal spread across urban, suburban, rural, and other areas. So we've got one more question for you. And that question is more about how you see your role in environmental education. Are you a pre-K through 12 classroom teacher? Are you a non-formal educator with a university or a college? Or another category? So it looks like the largest percentage of folks are definitely non-formal environmental education providers and providing environmental education in maybe nature centers or government agencies or other community environmental education providers. And we have a few formal educators and a few from the college or university level. So we've got a pretty nice spread of different folks on the call today, and this information will help us get to know you a little bit better and also help with some reporting on terms of who was on the webinar today. So thanks for filling those out.
And it looks like, before we go any further and move on, it looks like a couple of people are having a hard time hearing us. And so if I could ask participants, if you can hear us, could you please raise your hand? So use that little guy, the icon up at the top. And okay, so most people are hearing us. All right. So I'm not really quite sure why a couple of people, it looks like Joey and maybe Tim, are having a hard time with hearing us. And I'm not absolutely sure what to do in order to help help you troubleshoot that. Up at the, make sure your speakers are on for your computer. That's one thing. It's normally a little icon to the lower right of your screen on your computer. So down in the bottom part of your computer screen. That's one option. Up at the top of the Adobe Connect screen is the speaker icon. Make sure that that's not muted because that will make it so that you can't hear. Otherwise, not absolutely sure how I can help you with that. Maybe, oh, somebody has no hand option available. Boy, we're learning all sorts of things about the system. So maybe Melinda can sort of be thinking about possible options for folks as we move on into the webinar. And again, it is being recorded, and hopefully you would be able to hear the sound if you came back and viewed the recording, but hopefully we can get this settled. So just to get into the whole subject of the webinar today, the National Project for Excellence in Environmental Education was initiated by NAAEE in 1993, and its whole purpose has been the notion of promoting excellence in environmental education and trying to build our profession by developing a series of guidelines, documents that give us some notions of how to improve our practice. One of the things that's always nice when we talk about a particular project is to recognize our sponsors. We have been delighted that over the years we have had the U.S. Office of Environmental Protection, U.S. EPA Office of Environmental Education as our primary sponsor, and we are now sponsored out of something called EE Capacity, which is an EPA-funded national EE training program, and that program is housed in out of the Cornell University. It's always nice to note that we have a lot of other partners in this endeavor, and over the years, Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, NEEF, and certainly I want to recognize that our state environmental education associations, many of them have been strong partners throughout the years, and such partners as the Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education. We've also worked heavily with Project Learning Tree, Arbor Day Foundation, Project Wild, Keep America Beautiful, Project WET, and a number of other organizations. So we have Katie?
Sorry about that. So just to get to know a little bit more about everybody here and talk about what we're focusing on today, which is environmental education materials, we want to know a little bit about where your program content comes from. Is it things that you develop in-house in your organization or agency? Is it local or state level curriculum developed by other organizations? Is it curriculum materials developed by national organizations, maybe things like Project Learning Tree or Project Wild? Or is it that you're adapting existing curriculum to fit the needs of your audiences? And it looks like a large percentage of folks are developing, over half are developing their own curriculum at their organization or agency. And then we have quite a few who are also using curriculums that are developed by other state or national organizations. 30% local or state, and 30% by national. And again, over half are adapting existing curriculum to fit the needs of our audience. And there are a lot of great environmental education materials out there and a lot of great environmental education materials being developed. So it's great to see that spread across the different types of curricula that people are using. And when we talk about EE materials, we're talking about lesson plans, programs, outlines, curricula, all of the above. So just to define that a little bit more clearly. All right. Well, today we're really focusing on one set of guidelines in the National Project for Excellence in Environmental Education, and those are the Environmental Education Materials Guidelines for Excellence. And these can be used in a variety of ways, and no matter where you fall in that spectrum of how you develop your materials or where you get them, these resources are valuable for evaluating your resources, for selecting quality EE materials, and for developing new ones. Wherever you're at, you can use these guidelines in that process. And they were really developed through a very broad-based review and comment process that went on over 2 years, and over 1,000 people contributed. There was a very diverse writing team that came from all backgrounds and a variety of organizations to really pull together the best thinking in the fields around what is a quality environmental education material. to develop this set of guidelines.
As we develop the set of guidelines, everything has to be organized one way or another, and I tend to like to talk about all our different sets of guidelines as sort of a process of defining best practices, but in defining those best practices, you end up with needing to lump and split. And in this particular case, what we ended up with is what we call key characteristics of quality environmental education instructional materials. And what we're going to do next is basically walk you through a little bit of how these guidelines are organized and what we mean by these particular key characteristics. So here's just a snapshot of one of the pages in the Guidelines for Excellence for environmental education materials. And what you can see is that we have a key characteristic. In this particular case, it's number 1, fairness and accuracy. There's a one-sentence little description of what we mean by that. And then you'll notice underneath the little bird is something 1.1 factual accuracy, and then there's another one-sentence explanation of what we mean by factual accuracy. That 1.1 is what we call the guideline. So you have key characteristics, and then within key characteristics we have guidelines that help to explain or sort of add more to the idea of the key characteristic. And then under that, we even go a further level and we say what to look for. And these are indicators. They are the types of things that if a set of materials were factually accurate, you might be seeing some of those things documented within the materials one place or another. And then we also throughout the document have some boxes with examples or little stories, vignettes that help to provide a little bit of practice and a concrete imagery for our particular set of guidelines. As I said, the guidelines are divided into 6 key characteristics. The first key characteristic is called fairness and accuracy, and it's really all about being fair and being accurate. Sort of the title pretty much says a lot of it, but the guidelines get into what that means. So for us, we're talking about it being factually accurate to the extent possible. And we know that there are materials that you might be using that were originally developed back in the 70s or the 80s or 90s or even 3 years ago, and the information that's embedded in, especially the background information, might no longer be up to date. So even if they were factually accurate when they were developed, they may not be quite there now. So it just gives you some hints around what we mean by factual accuracy and where to go with that. We talk a lot about the importance of balanced presentations, being open to inquiry, so allowing the learners to ask good quality questions, and to make sure that all the materials reflect appropriate diversity. Jolyn?
Yeah, so again, my role here is to talk a little bit about how I implemented this in my program, and so I'll give you a very brief background to understand a little bit of where I was coming from at the time, and hopefully somewhere in there that will.
Jolyn, you're cutting in and out.
I took my first. Yeah, I've had a little bit of problem on the audio hearing that that you're cutting out when I listen to you. But can you hear me now? I don't know what to try and do about that. Are you hearing me okay now? Hello?
Yeah, Jolyn, I'm not hearing you other than a little cut in and out.
Is it any better now?
That's better. Keep speaking and we'll see if it works.
Okay, so I said I was gonna try and provide some a little bit of background on where I was coming from to give some examples of how we have used the guidelines in my organization. I took over this environmental education program in 2003, and I think the fairness and accuracy, one of the first things when I took this guidelines workshop early on was that everything that we had in our organization was passed down orally. There weren't any written materials for what we were doing. And so the first thing I got into this workshop, and I had kind of taken it on faith that the gentleman that I took the program over for had done his research and created the programming that he had, but there wasn't anything documenting that. And so, this one for us was as simple as taking a couple days and going down to the library and looking up what is the information that we're presenting, and even if it's stuff that we have some background knowledge in, how can we find a primary source to show that what we're teaching is accurate and is the best information. And that was a great exercise, one, to provide some validity to what we were teaching, but also we found that almost everything that was passed on was accurate, but it was also great in terms of learning all kinds of other things that maybe we weren't teaching or didn't know as we went through that process. But it took our program from one that was very popular to one that we could actually take and say, we've backed up everything that we're teaching, and we actually have a primary source. So that was one of the ways that we used this to take our programs from a very beginning level to the next level.
Dylan, you're still. Dylan, you're cutting in and out a little bit still. I'm not quite sure how to fix it. I'm going to move forward to the next key characteristic, and then we'll see if we can get Jolyn back again. It's the great technology wars of going, especially voice over internet, that with bandwidth and such, sometimes you get the cutting in and out. But the second key characteristic I wanted to point out to you has to do with depth. And certainly it's that notion of that we start with awareness and then we move forward in building concepts, but those concepts really need to be taught within a context, and hopefully not just a series of unrelated facts or unrelated concepts. One of the issues of what we were trying to address with depth was the notion that cuts across, frankly, a good portion of American education, is this notion that it's a mile wide and an inch deep. And if you've been following at all the development of the next generation science standards, the framework for that, and the draft would be out by the end of this month, supposedly, they're looking at focusing science education so that it isn't quite that mile wide and inch deep. So we're trying to encourage people to pick a few good robust concepts and really teach them at a depth, making sure that it's taught within a context, and making sure that you're paying some attention to scale, so that it's local scale, it's regional scale, it's global scale, and certainly time scales too. And did we get Jolyn back? Doesn't sound like it. So I'm going to continue on. I think the next one is Katie.
All right. Key characteristic 3 is one of my favorites of the key characteristics, and it's an emphasis on skills building, and basically the idea that environmental education should emphasize those lifelong and transferable skills like critical and creative thinking, applying skills to issues, and action skills. And these are a lot of the same skills that you would find in descriptions of 21st century skills. And critical and creative thinking involves everything from defining a problem to collecting information to drawing conclusions about an issue or a situation that you're talking about, developing hypotheses, examining different perspectives, and more. The applying skills to issues can look at everything from identifying issues, identifying stakeholders and their positions, weighing costs and benefits of possible solutions, evaluating information and perspectives pertaining to an issue or to a decision. And action skills are really about how do you identify the need for action? How do you make a plan for action? How do you evaluate the results of action or participation or of a decision? And how do you select the appropriate action strategies? So key characteristic 3 is really about those bigger skills that are very transferable to all different types of disciplines and thinking. And if Jolyn is back on, we'll ask him for kind of how that applies to his programming.
And I'm thinking he has problems because he was, oh, Jolyn? Well, we seem to have lost Jolyn, at least a moment. He couldn't hear, we couldn't hear him and he couldn't hear us, so there's probably some problem going on with his system. So I will just forward us to key characteristic number 4.
All right. Well, key characteristic number 4 is all about action orientation, and really about how EE materials, lesson plans, curricula, etc., can promote civic responsibility, encourage learners to use their knowledge and skills to solve problems or take action or make decisions or participate in some way. And the two guidelines within this key characteristic are sense of personal stake and responsibility and self-efficacy. And a sense of personal stake and responsibility really relates to how does your program or material examine possible consequences of behavior? How does it help evaluate different choices? How does the program convey the importance of individual action and its cumulative impact or group actions? All those things kind of make up that, are you furthering that sense of personal stake and responsibility? And then self-efficacy is really about how does your material strengthen learners' perspectives on their ability to influence the outcome of a situation or to apply their thinking and act on their conclusions. Do they think that they can make a difference? Are you celebrating successes of action? That's all part of self-efficacy and part of that whole action orientation.
Great, thank you. Just so Melinda can be keeping an eye on this, Jolyn stepped out and he's going to try to re-enter. So when you see him coming in, if you could promote him to host, we will hopefully be able to hear him, which would be very, very nice. The key characteristic 5 is sort of a departure. So the first 4 key characteristics of the guidelines really talk mostly about the content and especially the process of environmental education and getting us to environmental literacy in a lot of different ways, especially with the issues around action orientation. When we move into key characteristic 5 and then on to 6, we're starting to talk about just the materials themselves. So with this one, it's packed full of all sorts of good stuff that relates to instructional soundness. As Jolyn started to talk about, a lot of times in our programs, we develop them for ourselves in terms of with the notion that we're going to do the teaching, and we don't necessarily think about writing down specific goals and objectives. We think about all these little pieces, but we don't really sort of make them explicit. And in this key characteristic, we're saying make those explicit. Think about how you can make sure that your materials and your instruction are learner-centered, that you're paying attention to the fact that different people learn in different ways, that you're connecting to their everyday life, that you're worrying about an expanded learning environment. So taking students out into the community and out to the schoolyard and to other types of places. But also that we are very specifically thinking about goals and objectives, it being interdisciplinary, and that there is some sort of assessments built in to it. So there's really this whole sort of notion of thinking about the materials and making sure that they are using the best practices in terms of education and instruction. The last key characteristic has to do with usability, and it really is part of that notion that we may well be sharing our materials on to with someone else. So it's not just the back of a little card that you're taking out into the field with you or in front of the classroom or wherever. That these are materials that you're going to hopefully be sharing with other people, or if you're using someone else's materials that you've picked up. How easy are they to use? Are they materials that are adaptable to a variety of different types of settings and places? Is there a logic to them and how they're laid out? One of the notions of it being long-lived is this sort of sense that you may I remember looking at a set of materials once that were really fine in terms of how they were set up and the whole logic behind them and the educational objectives of them. But the instructor had to spend probably a good 3 to 4 hours to set up the 1 hour lesson. Well, that's probably not going to be long-lived in terms of being useful for a particular instructor out there. We want to make sure that if there's any sort of support that's needed, that it's available to people, and certainly that it's fitting with national and state and local standards or requirements, especially if they're geared towards formal K-12 education. So where we are now is we're gone through the 6 key characteristics, and you're seeing those 6 key characteristics back up on the screen there. And I see that Jolyn has joined us again. And are you able to hear us and speak?
I can hear you sometimes. Can you hear me?
You are still coming in and out. You seem to be cutting in and out a little bit. Oh, we seem to still be having a problem with Jolyn and catching in here. We do have one more poll for you to take, actually 2 more polls for you to take, and I'll turn it over to Katie.
Great. So, I think one of the things that's most striking to me about the guidelines is, especially formerly being in a non-formal education setting, is you might be going, oh my gosh, now that I've heard all these guidelines, my program's an hour. How do I fit all of these in? And I think it's important to note that you might not get them all in all the time. But there's something to work towards and to kind of think about how can you strengthen each one. So our first question really is about what's the easiest in your organization for you to get at. And that may have a lot to do with the vision or the mission of your organization. If you're a very science-based organization, you're probably hitting fairness and accuracy really, really well. If you have a limited time to actually present your programs, the depth might be harder to get at. So as you're kind of responding to these polls in terms of which are the easiest to get at, and as you can probably guess, the most difficult will be our next question. But if you have comments about that, feel free to type them into the chat, and we'll kind of start somewhat of a discussion, if we can, along what's really the easiest and what's the most difficult and why are they more challenging to incorporate in. So it looks like right now, in terms of what's easiest, fairness and accuracy is coming out pretty strong. About 30% of folks have indicated that that is the easiest for them to fit into their programs, and 30% around skill building. It looks like depth is a challenge for folks. We don't have quite as many folks indicating that that's the easiest, as well as action orientation and instructional soundness are right around that 10-15% area. And then usability is also right at the 6%. So let's go ahead and go to the next poll and respond to what's the most difficult. And as you're answering that, go ahead and write in the chat why you think those things are the most difficult, those characteristics are the most difficult to hit in your programs. So we've got a comment here from Fred that says he frequently cites the NAAE guidelines, mostly the non-formal guidelines, for a variety of library association meetings. And a lot of this has to do with discussing how librarians can become more green, and programs and projects for communities in libraries. So he definitely uses the non-formal guidelines. Action looks like it's difficult to do. Dorothy commented because it's difficult to get students out into the community. Leith brings up a good comment about, is action always appropriate in certain situations? Looks like we're getting quite a few comments on the action side, that it's difficult to have the time and Nancy commented that she provides environmental education in high-traffic public locations, so is looking for suggestions of resources for out of the classroom setting. So feel free to comment and add some of those suggestions of resources there. And while people are typing, Dorothy asked a question about depth. Bora, do you want to respond to that question in terms of explaining a little more deeply what you mean by depth in this scenario?
And I'm trying to find where she asked that question. So, can you define by what you mean by depth? Basically, what we're talking about depth is the notion that there's been a criticism of a lot of environmental education in the past, where it focused on a lot of facts, or it focused on sporadic identification of things, and not really getting into concept development and skill development. So obviously the third key characteristic is talking about actually focusing on developing good quality problem solving and creative thinking skills. Well, depth is really talking about picking a concept or a set of concepts that you want to teach to whoever your audience is, whether it's in the formal classroom or whether it's non-formal at a zoo, museum, nature center for adult audiences, and really getting into it so that they are able to understand that concept and its intricacies. Within science education now, they're talking a lot about learning progressions, and that notion that sometimes you need to understand one concept before you can build to learn a new concept. And so that's a lot of what we're talking about with depth, is that we want to make sure that it isn't just sort of a high fly by some notions. The other piece of it is that the sense of the importance of teaching within a context, so that, you know, for environmental education, we're talking about real world learning, and we want to make sure that the kids, or whoever your learners are, that they understand where this concept comes from, how it fits into the real world. So that's another sort of big piece of depth. I'm trying to think of another sort of piece of it, is that we want to make sure that when you're teaching a concept, perhaps it's a science concept at its base, but there may well be an economic or a social ramification to it, so that that's where that context comes in. And I'm hoping, Dorothy, does that help you understand it a bit more?
I'm seeing another comment from Fred that says, we are sadly being challenged on the instructional soundness of too many environmental issues from the political philosophies of some of the disciples of Limbaugh, Hannity, Beck, etc. I experience this as a need to have equal time in providing something other than radical environmentalism. And you know, Fred, I actually think that that's a great comment, and that's one of the things that is extraordinarily useful about these guidelines. And you know, one of the things that at the Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education, we were testifying in front of the education committee at our state legislature in support of a bill for environmental education, and got a lot of questions, political questions, about where we stood on environmental issues. And we were actually able to take these guidelines and say, look, here's this set of guidelines, and it very clearly outlines within the fairness and accuracy key characteristic that we're looking at a balanced perspective, and we're taking in multiple viewpoints and looking at things from different angles, and that helped us a ton to have this set of guidelines and this set of best practices that outlined that so clearly that we were able to respond to some of those questions and queries. So I think this is a useful tool for some of those things that definitely come up.
Which is probably a great segue to, Katie, you talking a little bit more about CAEE and how you've used the guidelines in your work.
Awesome. So at the Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education, as a professional organization, we're not developing programming and presenting it to learners. We're working with educators across the state, and we've actually found a lot of different ways to utilize the Project for Excellence in Environmental Education, and specifically the materials guidelines, just like the example that I was just giving of really being able to have something to defend environmental education and really describe what it's really about. We also, as an organization, are working on, as many states are, an environmental literacy plan for the state. And an environmental literacy plan, if you're not familiar with it, is a state plan working with your state Department of Education to really develop a statewide strategy for environmental education to integrate it into pre-K through 12 schools. And we've been working on this for several years, and actually included the summary of the materials guidelines as an appendix directly in our plan, so that our decision makers and leaders in education and our EE providers and schools and districts, so we're all on the same page about what quality EE materials look like. And in implementation of this plan, it could be used in any number of ways to help districts select materials and put together their pacing guides to include environmental education in the development of programs, but it's provided directly in there so that we can all be on the same page. And that's been a huge benefit to us to have this set of guidelines to be able to point to and support the work that we're doing. We also do quite a bit of training using the Guidelines for Excellence, and several years ago developed a program in resource review where you could submit a program that you taught or program outline. Basically, if you could write it down, you could submit it and have it peer reviewed. And we developed a self-assessment that goes right along with the guidelines that outlines each of the key characteristics and those guidelines, and you can evaluate your materials against them and say, yes, we're meeting this, or no, maybe we're not, and here's why, or maybe this isn't a goal of the program, is to get at this one, and provide really in-depth, valuable feedback back to our members and those organizations that submitted those reviews to participate in the peer review. And if you're interested in a Word document of the self-assessment, feel free to email me and I can forward that to you. I'll have Melinda put my email in the chat so you can see that there. But just another way that we're using the guidelines to help our members and programs move forward. And I would say this has been one of our most valuable trainings that we do is on the materials guidelines, because depending on how you come into environmental education, some of these may come across, some of the key characteristics may come really naturally and they may be very strong for you. If you're coming in from a education perspective and your background is in formal education, you're probably hitting instructional soundness really well, and you really have an in-depth knowledge of learners and learning. If you're coming from a natural resource background, maybe you have your factual accuracy really strong, or the depth of the knowledge you can present is really strong. But there's always something that can help build up or strengthen your programs in one of those guidelines. And I think there are a lot of aha moments to be had with them. So those are just a few examples of ways that we're using and distributing the guidelines to both educators and our leaders and decision makers, so that they really have a good idea of what quality environmental education really looks like.
Thank you, Katie. As Katie's mentioned, CAE has a long history of using the guidelines in their work and spreading the word, as it were, through things like their environmental literacy plan and through workshops. We also have a long history of groups using the guidelines in the development of their materials. So those of you who are familiar with Project Learning Tree or Project Wild, Keep America Beautiful, and their curricular activity guides, they've all been using the guidelines as they develop them. And we're really quite pleased with that, because it helps, we believe, the field, but it's also to have these exemplary programs across the country using the guidelines right there when they're writing their new activity guides. One of the other pieces in there, and I am blanking as I'm about to say this, but they've actually been used too in a couple of industrial settings. So groups that, so a company that wanted to develop a sort of green initiative within the company and wanted to have instructional materials for their employees, they used the guidelines as they developed those instructional materials. So they've been used in a variety of different ways, some of them quite political, as Katie sort of alluded to. We know that they've been used to help shore up the credibility of the field of environmental education a number of different times, so that be able to show folks who might question our work and our professionalism that we're able to show them the guidelines and explain how we use them in our practice. Want to just sort of move on a little bit from there, because we're starting to run out of time. If you would like to learn more about the National Project for Excellence in Environmental Education, or this particular set of guidelines, the environmental education materials, we have a couple of different opportunities for you. One is that because we are funded, at least through the end of this year, through Environmental Protection Agency, we can offer workshops in various parts of the country. We have something called the Guidelines Trainers Bureau, and these are individuals who have gone through training and are able to facilitate workshops. So if you think you might be interested in sponsoring a workshop somewhere in your state or province, please get in touch with me, and we might be able to help you out with that. EPA is quite wonderful in how they have funded and continued to support this project. So we have copies of the books, and those are available in both hard copy as well as online. So if you go up to our EE-linked website, eelinked.net/n/guidelines, you can access the guidelines. You can find out about future webinars that we will be having in this series. And I wanted to just show you a slide of the EE Linked and the types of things that you can find up there. We have postings about different products and projects that are related to the Guidelines for Excellence. You can go up to this website and root around by going to the topics, which are here on the left-hand side. You can find out about the materials, and if you clicked on that, you would get to a screen like this, and you will notice that on the right-hand side there are little PDF icons. So the materials guidelines complete, and the workbook, and a summary, which is just a one-pager, the materials guidelines translated into Spanish, and each of those are downloadable PDFs, and they're free. So that's another way that you can access more information about the guidelines. And up on this website, there's really quite a bit of other stuff that if you root around for the other materials that we have, the early childhood guidelines and such, and some of the other products that we have developed. We do have a series of 4 more webinars, and I'm just putting that up on the screen right now. But if you go to that EE Linked website, so eelinked.net/n/guidelines, there is a listing of all of these webinars along with a SurveyMonkey link for you to click on, register for the webinar, and get the information that you need to join us. And then one more thing that I wanted to mention to you related to the guidelines is that we have developed up to this point 5 sets of guidelines, and we're doing a webinar on focusing on each one of those sets of guidelines. We are also in the process of developing a brand new set of guidelines focusing on community environmental education. Akima Price, many of you may know her, is helping us develop that set of guidelines. And if you are interested in becoming involved with that process and having input into the development of the new community EE guidelines, I would encourage you highly to get in touch with Akima. Her email address is there. We should be having a first draft of them available sometime in the late summer, and then they'll be available for folks to comment on and give us feedback and provide assistance in the development of them. And we'll be going through that same comment and review process that Katie talked about before that we've used in the development of each of our sets of guidelines. So this gets us to questions. If you have burning questions that you would like to ask at this point about the guidelines or the project or how to access any of the materials, please type that into the chat, and we'll try our best to answer them. What I'd like to mention while you're doing that is that there are 3 different ways that you can access copies of the guidelines. One is by going up to EE Linked, and then they're, as I mentioned before, they're in PDF and you can download them. A second way is that you can go to EPA's website, so epa.gov. Frankly, what I would do is I would go to Google and I would put in the EPA Office of Environmental Education, and through them you can order hard copies of all of the guidelines for free. And then finally, the chat just expanded. There we go. Thank you. And you can order up to 10 copies, I believe, of each of the guidelines for free from EPA. And then a third way that you can access copies is through NAAEE. And if you go up to their website, which is just NAAEE.net, and to publications, you could purchase them through NAAE, and they're just being sold for cost of the shipping and handling. So those are different ways that you can get access to any of these guidelines. And obviously my last note up there is to join us at the NAAE conference. It's in October 10th through the 13th in Oakland, California. And the call for presentations is open, and I believe it's open until the 25th of April. So you've got a little bit of time if you'd like to try to present at the conference. It's a wonderful, wonderful conference. I've been to over 30 of them, and I would love to see you all at it in October. And you can go up again to the NAAEE website, which is just NAAEE.net, to access more information about the conference and how to present. So do we have any questions? Maybe Melinda, if you've been following any of the questions that we might want to focus on.
So this is Katie, and I've got a couple here that came up, and it's great watching the chat. People are answering each other's questions and providing lots of awesome resources to check out. So thank you for jumping in and being a part of that conversation. Just a couple of the things that I've seen rotate through is there was a question about there's been several comments about some things that are not related to the guidelines in particular, but kind of big EE questions right now. One of which has been, that came up a couple times, was funding for EE. And if you go to NAAEE's website, you can sign up for kind of monthly updates, and they'll send out any grants or things in their newsletter that you can sign up to get. So definitely think about that in terms of looking for additional funding. Same with signing up to be a friend on their Facebook page. They often post different funding opportunities there. And it's another great way. Few folks asked about how do you connect with other people on curriculum, and that would be another online way to kind of connect with the EE community out there, as well as getting in touch with your state organizations who can link you to state organizations like CAEE. There's one in, I think, 46 states and a number of provinces and regions in Canada and Mexico as well. So definitely connect with those. There was another question about EPA funding, and if you're interested in that, definitely think about, there's monthly Action Network calls through NAAEE that you can jump on, and that's a great place to talk about those topics, and you can get connected through NAAEE. Those are a few of the questions that I have seen come up.
And I just wanted to jump in and mention two things. One is that, you know, the President's budget this year did not include funding for the Office of Environmental Education, and also environmental literacy within NOAA was not included in the President's budget. So that's what some of those discussions have been about on the advocacy calls each month, to connect people in, to know what is happening and what the different strategies are that NAEE is using, as well as others in the field are using, to try to help improve our budget picture. What the administration has been telling people is that although they have not asked for explicit money for environmental education for EPA or NOAA, is that the there will be funding for environmental education, but spread across the agencies. So different configuration, and we just don't know, and we also don't know what Congress might do. So it's always one of those big questions of life of what our funding picture will be. One of the other notes that who is it? Nadine has mentioned, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies have produced a number of different documents, and she gives a great URL there for conservation education strategies. And they have developed some learning progressions around conservation education, especially focusing on wildlife and fishing. Those, are two of the focus, because it's sort of an obvious focus for theirs. But they also have some other really great documents up on that website. I've noticed a couple of people asking questions about getting kids out or getting people outside of the classroom and such. There's a wonderful guide to field experiences, so taking students out into the field to do data collection, and it has sample rubrics and all sorts of things in it. So some really, really nice documents are available up on the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies website and their conservation education strategies. There's also a new document out, and I'm pretty sure it's posted there, about systems thinking and different strategies for teaching systems thinking. So there's great stuff out there if you can spend a little bit of time on it. Any other things that folks are noticing? Katie?
It looks like sorry, I'm just thumbing through.
Yes, and I'm sort of doing the same of scanning through to see if there's anything. But hopefully folks have been able to get their questions answered, and that they have a chance to learn a little bit about this. We did, if you missed the announcement at the very beginning, we did record this webinar, and so it will be posted, or at least the URL that will get you there will be posted up on EE Linked, so that either if you missed some part of it because of sound problems, or you just came in a little bit late, you'll be able to basically listen and watch the slide presentation, and certainly pass that on to others as it seems to make sense. I'm not sure how long it will be archived and available, because we're doing it through Cornell University, and it's just one of those, their system, but I assume it will be available at least for a month or so.
And I also believe that I've seen a couple folks chat that they'd like to connect with an individual who made a comment, and I believe that you can send a private chat with them and connect with email addresses if you just hover over their name in the participant list, and that way you can exchange email addresses and connect with some of the folks that you may have been chatting with by typing. So I think saw a couple of great connections being made in the chat.
And certainly, if most of you probably have my email address, because I sent out the reminder of how to register or how to join the webinar, but it's simply borasimmons@gmail.com. So if you have additional questions or comments, please feel free to email those to me. And I think it's probably about time to sort of say farewell, I would really like to thank Katie and CAEE for joining us on the webinar and helping us out. And Jolyn, and I'm really sorry that we had technical difficulties because he has great things to share with folks about how he's used the guidelines, but technology is technology. And I would really like to thank all of you for participating in the webinar and hope that it helped you understand the guidelines a bit more. So again, thank you all, and oops, I think, so Katie just noted up there the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agency's resources for outdoor investigations. So that's another resource that might be of help to others. So thank you very much. I think with that I will close out the meeting and hope to run into you at the NAAEE conference in October. Bye for now.
Thanks.